anywhere, and Marie's the name of his latest flame.
You might wonder why chapter 29 opens with the story of a French butcher's daughter. Her name was Marie Gauze. She embodied Enlightenment ideals of the 1790s, which were a very bold thing to speak up for women's rights, freedom, and equality. It didn't have a very happy ending either, because she ended up being executed. She never received the credit that her thoughts deserved. Still, her fight to spread Enlightenment ideals during the French Revolution helps explain what people were fighting for and how these ideals influenced other parts of the world. Let's explore two major revolutions, but more importantly, the two crucial factors of these revolutions: the Enlightenment ideals and the consolidation of national states. You might ask yourself why these two things were so important. It may seem like a given to us in the United States, but it really wasn't until the mid-20th century that freedom and equality among citizens in nearly every nation was an actual goal, and that popular sovereignty was the new face of the government. Back in the 17th and 18th centuries, there were philosophers like John Locke of England, who stated that rulers were not divine agents, and that individuals had personal rights that needed to be protected for the good of society. Other Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire fought against religious persecution of minorities, and there was also Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was one of the greatest advocates for political equality. We can thank the 18th and 19th century revolutionary leaders who fought for the governments that would work for the needs and benefits of the citizens, not just the wealthy or royalty. That's called popular sovereignty. In North America, we can thank the colonists who wanted independence from British rule, and in France, we can thank the French revolutionaries for overthrowing the monarchy, even though their methods were much more radical and violent than the colonists. That was a major difference in the revolutions. The colonists did not want to completely destroy the British government, nor all the centuries of British innovation and cultural achievements. They just wanted to rule their own land. The French situation was different. It was fueled by frustration and disgust with the monarchy, and the people were so ready to destroy the old government with vengeance. Because of Enlightenment ideals, a new way of thinking about government order occurred, and this way of thinking eventually led to the way states and societies were organized throughout the world. It wasn't immediate, but Enlightenment ideals led to the way countries and boundaries were formed. North America in the 1760s started to really resent British rule, especially the taxes and acts they forced the colonists to accept. Colonists still thought of themselves as British, but they began to resent being treated like subjects. They were tired of providing housing for the British troops, the Quartering Act, tired of paying extra taxes on molasses, the Sugar Act, and eventually started using the slogan, "No taxation without representation," even dumping a whole cargo load of tea into the Boston Harbor. To really understand what the colonists were fighting for, we can move on to today's news from New York Governor Cuomo.
We had this argument. It was done a long time ago. People by the name of Hamilton and Jefferson and Madison and Washington, and they concluded this. They wrote a document that's called the Constitution of the United States, and it is an explicit and intricate balance of power between the federal government and the state governments. And it says the federal government does not have absolute power. It says the exact opposite that the president said. It says that would be a king. We would have had King George Washington, and we didn't have King George Washington, and we don't have King Trump. We have President Trump. And remember, the colonies created the federal government. The states created the federal government, not the other way around. We have the 10th Amendment that is explicit.
Clearly, George Washington was a president, not a king, and his leadership reflected Enlightenment ideals that led to an American independence and Constitution of the United States. The American Revolution led into the French Revolution. This is Louis XVI, King of France. France needed money after paying off war debts and helping fund the colonists' fight against the British. At first, King Louis tried to tax the aristocrats, but they hated that idea. So he had to call a meeting with the three estates in 1789 to authorize new taxes. The third estate consisted of 24 million peasants, but their votes were always canceled out by the second estates because each estate had one vote, and each vote was equal despite having 24 million peasants in the third estate. This was the way the Ancien Regime worked, but things were all about to change. The Third Estate decided to break away from the other two estates, becoming the National Assembly. They promised they would stick together until France had a new constitution. The following years were violent ones as crowds radicalized and fought the aristocracy. The French revolutionaries were inspired by the American revolutionaries' ideas about the individual's rights to liberty, but they were far more violent. They took away from the clergy's power, took away the king's legislative authority, and turned France into a constitutional monarchy. After the National Assembly formed, French leaders created the Convention, which got rid of the monarchy, executed Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and made France a republic. Then Robespierre and the Jacobin Party took over, tried to get rid of Christianity, changed the calendar, and executed about 40,000 people in 1 year. The convention finally arrested Robespierre, and the Directory was formed, 1795 to 99, which was little more pragmatic. But things really began to change under the reign of Napoleon, 1769 to 1821. As emperor, he created the Civil Code to help stabilize French society. Because of the Enlightenment ideals of the American and French revolutions, other revolutions happened around the world. For example, during the Haitian Revolution, a civil war was sparked between white settlers and gens de couleur, free people of color. There were violent slave revolts, and a leader named Toussaint Louverture eventually led Haiti to independence. There were also wars of independence in Spanish and Portuguese colonies, and the serious peasant rebellion led by Miguel de Hidalgo in Mexico. In South America, the independence movement was led by Simón Bolívar, a Creole leader inspired by George Washington. All these revolutions brought about the emergence of ideologies, conservatism and liberalism. There were changes in thought regarding slavery and women's rights. The 18th century was the very beginning of the campaign to end the slave trade, at the same time heightening awareness of women's rights and social reform driven by Enlightenment ideals. Ironically, nationalism and the consolidation of national states had little to do with the Enlightenment ideals, but all the wars had inspired a sense of community identity that led to the way the world became organized. Europeans started creating states based on nationalism. A lot of times this was very divisive, as we can see when tensions arose between nationalities such as the anti-Semitic movement of the late 19th century and the conflicts between Palestinians and Jews. We also see how nationalist aspirations created unity, such as in the unification of Italy and Germany. This was an important landmark in the 19th century, the idea of what it meant to be a nation. Nationalism could be cultural, political, or both. Regardless, Enlightenment ideals were at the root of all of this change. The abolishment of monarchies, attention to human rights, and most importantly, the way the 20th century societies were ultimately restructured.